Thank you all for tuning into Drafters TV. I'm your host, Ben Hauver, and on today's video, we are going to be talking about the Drafters Best Ball Championship. Finally, a large field best ball tournament with some sizable money up top hits the market. $25,000 guaranteed prize pool with $10K to first. If you're an avid best ball drafter like I am, I'm sure you've been waiting for something like this, and finally it is here. Drafters has been dropping little hints here and there that something like this was coming, and finally last week it hit the lobby. Today I'm going to break down every angle of this tournament, and on today's video I'm also going to look at a few different draft strategies that I've taken when drafting teams for this and whether or not I believe they were effective. And I'll talk through, some of the thought behind the picks that I made, why I made the picks, and the overall construction of these teams. Hopefully it'll give the viewers out there some insight on what they can expect if they, like me, want to take a shot at that $10,000 top prize. However, before we get into that, I've got to announce the winner of last week's giveaway. On the last video, which you can check out here, I discussed 8 late round fantasy sleepers for the 2020 season. Guys like Miles Boykin, Marquise Goodwin, and Josh Oliver, to name a few. And I asked the viewers out there to subscribe to this channel and then comment on the video with their favorite sleeper and drafters username. We had a handful of submissions, and I've got the randomizer open over here on another screen. All of the names inputted, we had 15 submissions, so that's pretty cool. And whoever gets selected here, top of the list, is going to win an $11 ticket for drafters. The name will be announced in 3, 2, 1, and we've got Geoff Ryan, who submitted his pick as Russell Gage, who he said as a wide receiver 7, 8, or 9 he likes. So Geoff, thank you for the submission. You can go ahead and send a DM on Twitter to Drafters Fantasy and they will hook you up with that. So thank you guys for submitting. And guess what? The exciting thing is today we're talking about this tournament. So next week we're going to give away a ticket to the Drafters Best Ball Championship tournament. So what we're going to do, same thing, subscribe to this YouTube channel right here, and then comment below with your favorite draft strategy for a best ball tournament. Maybe it'll be one of the ones that I address in this video. Maybe it'll be something that I looked over in a strategy that you like and you'll be taking. So again, subscribe, comment your favorite draft strategy below for this tournament, as well as your drafter's username. The winner will be selected on next week's video. So without any further ado, let's talk about the details for this Best Ball Championship tournament over on Drafters. It went live last week on Friday, July 3rd, and it looks like it'll be close to 60% full by the time this video goes live. So what we're looking at here is a buy-in of $5.50. The field, 5,000 players with 100 entry max per player. Drafts are going to be done in groupings of 10. So in totality, this tournament is going to comprise of 500 10-team, 20-round drafts. The prize pool, $25,000 with $10K to first place, $2,000 to second, and $1,000 to third. A little bit of quick math for the people out there who don't have their calculator open. We're looking at about 9% rate. Very reasonable for a tournament like this, with 52% of the prize pool consolidated to the top 3 finishes, 40% of which is going to first place. Where Drafters differentiates itself from some of the previous iterations we've seen of best ball tournaments is that they decided to go without a playoff structure. There's no bracket, no late season head-to-heads. It is just total points. The winner of this league is going to need to outscore 4,999 other entries in total points from weeks 1 to week 16. So when you take all of that information into consideration, I think that we're going to come away with 2 very important takeaways. One, upside is king. You're not just trying to beat 10 other league mates. You're trying to draft the highest scoring team out of 510 team drafts. Each and every one of your picks should be emphasizing that fact. What is this player's ceiling, and how do I correlate my roster to reflect a reality where that player hitting their ceiling can benefit me in multiple avenues. Stacking in terms of your roster with quarterbacks and their pass catchers is one example of that correlation. And you'll see me talk about that a little bit more when we look at some of the teams that I've drafted up to this point. The second big takeaway, I think, from looking at all the information about this tournament is that building a unique roster is going to give you an edge. With so much money up top, the goal should not simply be to finish in the money, right? You should be gunning for a top 3 or ideally top 1 finish. And we're not going to be wanting to split that prize, are we? We don't want a lineup double in there. So with 20 round drafts in a field of 5,000 players, it's going to be extremely difficult to find double up lineups. There's going to be so much variance on a draft to draft basis that, I don't think it's a huge cause for concern. That being said, I'd rather be safe than sorry. And I'm going to borrow, one of the cornerstone theories from DFS that I feel like strongly applies to this situation. And that's going to be by getting ownership through leverage. Earlier I mentioned the deep sleeper video that I did for drafters last week. A handful of players that I spoke about, guys like Josh Oliver or Marquise Goodwin, will go undrafted in the majority of these tournament drafts. By simply spending a final round pick on one of these 1% owned guys, I think you differentiate yourself from the field, and in the event that they break out into a more substantial role than expected, you'll be one of very few teams reaping the benefits from those fantasy points. So upside and building a unique roster, two things that we have to look at in every draft that we do for this thing. Now, let's get into some specific team strategy. I've drafted a handful of teams. I've done about 8 of them so far up to this point. All with varying draft strategies. Sometimes I just go in, not really thinking about it, letting the draft fall to me how it will. Other times, specifically for this video, I went in with the idea that I'm going to do this type of draft and we're going to see how that goes. So first of all, I just want to make it clear that I think that the best strategy you can implement in these tournaments is simply adhering to what we just talked about, targeting upside, building unique and correlated rosters. I don't think that going into a draft saying, all right, I'm going to go 0 running back here, or I'm going to draft, 4 wide receivers with my first 6 picks. I don't think that that is usually the best way to go. I think that, the key to being a strong drafter is being able to capitalize off of how each individual draft board falls. That being said, for the sake of experimentation, I did draft a few of these teams with set strategies in mind just to see how they would turn out, for science. So let's start off with a classic here. The first team we're going to be looking at is a VBD draft, which is value-based drafting. Basically, I drafted this team with one goal in mind, and that was to make as many of my 20 picks value picks. I tried to select players after their ADP in every spot that I could, without sabotaging the viability of this roster. So I started from the 1 spot, and I think, I did pretty well here, at least in terms of executing the VBD draft. 16 out of my 20 picks would be considered value picks in terms of ADP. I'll be honest here, we're going to talk about 3 teams today. This is probably my least favorite of the 3 and my least favorite out of the 8 drafts that I've done so far. And that's because I ended up with a lot of players that I don't necessarily consider targets of mine. Because when value is my top priority, I ended up making picks that I normally wouldn't just because certain guys fell to certain spots. The 2-3 turn where I selected Lamar Jackson and Aaron Jones is a prime example. Now, I'm not saying that I hate the start to this team. Going Christian McCaffrey, Lamar Jackson, and Aaron Jones to start a draft gives you a lot of upside. That's a trio with a lot of upside. But because I was committed to chasing value all over this draft, I ended up missing on guys like Marquise Brown, who, frequently gets taken ahead of his ADP. If I did draft Lamar Jackson in a format like this, usually I'm going to be making a concerted effort to stack him with either Marquise Brown or Mark Andrews. Neither of those ended up falling to me in a spot that would have been considered a value here. So I ended up going without and eventually drafting Miles Boykin with my final pick just to give me that stack of Lamar Jackson. Now that does move me forward towards one of my goals, which is building a unique lineup. Miles Boykin is going to go undrafted in a lot of these things, and stacking him with Lamar, I think, is definitely solid. Where my obsession with value really hurt me in this draft was the mid-rounds. Jerry Jeudy is a guy that I've done my best to avoid in these drafts. But because he fell to me at pick 121 and I was weak at wide receiver at this point in the draft, I pulled the trigger. I drafted Kerryon Johnson in the 9th round over Brandon Cooks, who I think would have been a better fit for this team, especially considering the construction, considering that DeAndre Swift was already locked in as this team's RB3. In fact, at the 8-9 turn, if I hadn't taken Lamar Jackson earlier, I would have been able to justify picking Josh Allen to pair with Stephon Diggs, which when you consider the overall price of all the players involved, I think would have been an all-in-all higher upside, more valuable stack to chase when it was all said and done. It also would have opened me up to taking a stronger wide receiver or running back for this roster opposed to a quarterback at the top of the third round. I do think tight end is a strength of this team. When you look at it, there's a ton of upside in having Evan Ingram, Hunter Henry, and Noah Fant all on this roster. I talked about these guys in depth on my tight end rankings video that we did with Peter Overzet, which you can find on this channel. And really, I love being able to secure 3 guys with ceilings like they have. And I think it all but guarantees me just strong tight end production on a week-to-week basis. Finally, I was able to grab Ryan Tannehill as my QB2 late to pair with my team's wide receiver 1 in A.J. Brown. I tried my best to double or even triple stack these tournament rosters, and when both guys present themselves as value like they did in this spot, that is even better. All in all, I would rate this team a solid 5.5 out of 10. It does have some upside, but this isn't a strategy that I see myself rolling out in the future. The biggest problem with BBD drafting is that it assumes that ADP is either correct or efficient. When you feel good about making these value picks, it's because you're beating ADP. However, if you make the assumption that ADP is a poor reflection of expected fantasy points, which it is, it doesn't really matter if I draft Jerry Jeudy 20 picks later than his ADP if I believe that all in all, Jerry Jeudy is being selected about 50 picks higher than he should be, which I do believe. Truthfully, how much value am I getting when I'm drafting him, still 30 picks higher than I should just because it's a good ADP value? I don't think there's much value in that, and that's why I don't really subscribe to the idea of VBD all in all. I do think that targeting value in these drafts is a smart decision. It's just not the end-all be-all. I think that upside and uniqueness are more important, like we talked about at the top of the video. Let's move on to team number 2, and we're going to talk about Fantasy Twitter's favorite draft strategy, 0RB. This time I was picking from the 8th spot, and I started off my team with 4 out of my 5 picks being dedicated to the wide receiver position, 1 of them to the quarterback position, and I didn't take my first running back until pick 53 in the 6th round where I grabbed Le'Veon Bell as my RB1. In my opinion, this is a much more viable draft strategy opposed to VBD. When done correctly, it capitalizes on high ceiling, and its biggest weakness is the questionable floor of the running backs you draft. Well, guess what? Floor doesn't matter in a format where you're trying to beat 5,000 people in total points. It should just be ceiling, ceiling, ceiling. I rarely draft 0 running back in standard best ball because I think the floor of these rosters is incredibly low. Running backs with secure workloads are a valued commodity, especially in today's NFL, and they fly off the board in these drafts. That being said, when you load up on guys like Ronald Jones, Tevin Coleman, Tony Pollard, Antonio Gibson, like I did in this draft, you understand that, yes, while their projected workloads probably sit somewhere between very low and ambiguous at best, if things break right for them, they could end up being league winners. Drafting this way also allows you to have a wildly high ceiling at the wide receiver position on a week-to-week basis. Tyreek Hill, DeAndre Hopkins, Juju Smith-Schuster, Cooper Kupp, all on this team. That's kind of nutty when you really think about it. Extremely high ceiling with the capability of putting some truly insane point totals up on a week-to-week basis if their boom weeks happen to line up. In terms of roster construction, if you do opt to go 0 running back, I think it's important to put yourself in a position to be able to draft at least 6 running backs opposed to 5, which I think is also a very standard construction. Some of those guys, they're going to miss. It's just a truth that you need to accept and a risk that you have to be willing to take when you decide to draft 0 running back. These guys have questionable workloads. Very rarely are you going to draft 5 or 6 of them that happen to be the guys that break out with more substantial roles than they're being projected for. However, by leaving yourself room to draft 6 players instead of 5, you're giving yourself more opportunities for at least 1 or 2 of those guys to fall into their top tier range of outcomes, which is exactly the point of a draft like this. A few quick notes. I did feel lucky to land Patrick Mahomes in the third round at pick 29. I don't draft QB early very often, but if I do go for a guy like Mahomes in a draft like this, I want it to be on a roster where I already have one of Tyreek Hill or Travis Kelce. Drafting Mahomes also allows me to do what we just talked about and draft a 6th RB because I can feel confident about going with a 2 quarterback construction. I still have my 3 tight ends, 5 picks spent between the 2 onesie positions, and then I can still hammer 9 wide receivers and get a 6th running back without sacrificing quarterback or tight end. I also felt pretty lucky in this draft when Ben Roethlisberger fell all the way to pick 153 and allowed me to complete yet another roster with a double stack. I have Mahomes to Hill and Ben to Smith-Schuster. All in all, I do like this draft strategy. I do think it is tournament viable, and I would rate this team about 7.5 out of 10. And finally, our last draft strategy today builds on the concept of zero running back and in my mind improves upon it. I've seen a few different names for this strategy across the industry. I think modified zero RB is the best description, and essentially it's the same exact concept as zero RB. You build your team around a strong core of wide receivers with high ceilings. You wait on running back, and perhaps you also grab a top-tier tight end or quarterback to make room for a 6th running back spot on the team. The main difference between modified zero running back and zero running back is that you begin your roster with a top-tier running back 1 and then proceed to wait on the position the same way you would for zero RB. So here's my attempt at modified zero RB. It was actually my first entry into this drafters tournament. Again, drafting from the 1st overall pick. And I believe this strategy is best executed when you have a top 4 overall pick. You can secure an elite running back 1 guaranteed. In this instance, I took McCaffrey, and then build out the rest of your roster before coming back to address the running back 2 spot. So after going with McCaffrey at the first pick, I went tight end, wide receiver, wide receiver, wide receiver, wide receiver, 4 picks straight, and then quarterback before coming back to running back for the second time with the last pick of round 7. As was the case with the zero running back team, I spent a combined 5 picks on the onesie positions. This time it was 3 quarterbacks and 2 tight ends, courtesy of the strength that Travis Kelce gives the roster, which allowed me to draft, you guessed it, 6 running backs. And if you look at the backs that I chose to go with after getting McCaffrey with the 1st overall pick, the modified zero running back is extremely similar to the zero running back group of players that you want to take. Kerryon Johnson, Tevin Coleman, Zach Moss, Darrell Henderson, all guys who are splitting work in backfields, but realistically are just an injury or disappointing season from a teammate away from having massive roles. Then you take a look at the wide receiver core. It includes Galladay, Cooper, A.J. Brown, Steph Diggs, A.J. Green, Brandon Cooks. The week-to-week ceiling on this roster is sky high. The cherry on top, of course, is that I was able to execute the triple stack on this team. Prescott to Cooper, Stafford to Galladay, and Cam Newton to N'Keal Harry. All in all, this is one of, if not my favorite way to attack these best ball tournament drafts. I would rate this team 9 out of 10. Absolutely love the ceiling for this squad. So in conclusion, VBD, meh. Zero running back, okay, it's solid. Modified zero running back, we're in the money. But how do you guys feel about it? Did you agree with my takes on these teams and these draft strategies? Make sure you comment below. Let me know. There were a few draft strategies that I've toyed with that I didn't get a chance to talk about in this video. Zero wide receiver, the inverse of zero running back overload or onslaught, whatever you want to call it, where you just hammer running backs and then build the rest of your roster later. Perhaps we'll get to these in a later video, but don't forget, if you want a chance to win a free ticket to the best ball tournament on Drafters, all you have to do is subscribe to this YouTube channel and comment below with your favorite draft strategy for attacking these best ball tournaments. And of course, leave your Drafters username so we know how to get in touch with you. Make sure you check back on next week's video to see if you are the lucky winner. Until then, thank you for listening and happy drafting.